Indiana, and I serve as Special Counsel of Complex Litigation for the Indiana Attorney General's Office.
Good afternoon. My name is Dan Wong. I'm a retired attorney and former judge. I'm also on the National Board of Directors for the Center for Civic Education. I live in Boise, Idaho.
And my name is Myron Yoder. I'm the chairman of the Professional Standards and Practices Commission for the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, and a 37-year retired educator from the Allentown School District, where I taught We the People for all those years. Thank you for being here, and we look forward to your presentation. And you all are?
Good afternoon, judges. We are Unit 6 from Wauwatosa East High School in Wisconsin. We are coached by Mr. Daniel McHugh and Mr. Tyler Marzin. My name is Rosie Villa.
Good afternoon. My name is Matthew Casey.
Hello, I'm Sophia Castanozzi.
And good afternoon. My name is Nora Tennell.
All right. Thanks, everyone. We have selected question number 1. I will give you time for your opening statement. In 1963, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "Never in history of this nation have so many people been arrested for the cause of freedom and human dignity. What lessons can be learned from the Children's March in Birmingham, Alabama? What is civic engagement and what is its significance in American history? What responsibility, if any, do schools have to promote civic engagement?" You may begin.
Almost 1,000 young children were jailed on May 2nd, 1963, the first day of the march that changed the nation. These children had gathered and learned about nonviolent practices in preparation, wanting to contribute to the civil rights movement. Following the march, arrested children filled up the jails and the fairgrounds, and the violent response from the police led to national outrage. The efforts of these children forced the country to address the racism, discrimination, and unjust laws in place. The Children's March in Birmingham showed the value of non-voting expressions, civic virtue, and the importance of youth in policymaking and protest.
Professor Thomas Erlich at Stanford University defined civic engagement as, quote, "working to make a difference in the civic life of our communities through both political and non-political processes," unquote. Though the fundamental actions of political virtue include voting and running for office, the value of civil disobedience in the U.S. cannot be neglected. Petition and assembly are rights protected in the First Amendment, an imperative for those disenfranchised, or those inability to vote or run for office to express their opposition to unjust laws. American colonists had used writings, movements, and eventually war to express their need for government representation and freedom from the oppressive British monarchy. John Locke held that citizens have the right to change the government if it's not upholding its end of the social contract, which justifies protests. Protests and walkouts held at the colleges during the Vietnam War include the largest protest over 100,000 people at the Lincoln Memorial in 1967, eventually contributed to the end of the U.S. involvement in the Vietnam War and the creation of the 26th Amendment.
Aristotle argued that civic virtue was citizens having a part in ruling and being ruled. Part of ruling means protecting the rights of others in the society through acts of enlightened self-interest. Volunteering helps others in their society and also promotes other acts of civic virtue. Furthermore, a study from the Department of Commerce in 2005 shows that students required to participate in community service had an increased standard deviation of 0.32 in their likeliness to vote and participate in civic engagement. This shows that even just participating in community service leaves a person more inclined to be civically virtuous. Many schools have encouraged this by providing students with service opportunities or with graduation service requirements, which in turn encourages future societal participation.
In the 21st century, protest movements have been more commonplace in our culture, especially with the participation of young people. The March for Our Lives protest on March 14, 2018, had an estimated 800,000 protesters marching on Washington, a majority of them being students. Across the nation, thousands of students walked out to honor victims of gun violence and to protest gun laws, including our own high school, Wauwatosa East. Both of these movements were heavily organized by students fighting for change in government policies, but the involvement of law enforcement was, of course, very different. While the police directly opposed and responded violently to the Children's March, most schools coordinated with law enforcement to protect the students during the March for Our Lives.
Schools' first responsibility is to protect students' physical safety and education. While it is important to encourage student civic engagement, they are justified in limiting student expression for missing class and breaking the dress code. However, they cannot punish students more harshly based on their causes, such as wearing an appropriate shirt condemning war. They can punish more harshly based on intent. Schools maintain a responsibility to promote civic engagement by educating children on the past examples of it in our history. The words Dr. King spoke to hundreds of arrested children in a juvenile center truly express the value of children's voices. Quote, "What you will do this day will impact children who have not been born," unquote. This concludes our statement, and we are ready for your questions.
Thank you. So underlying in all of this is the concept of common good. And I'm curious as to your take on what you think the common good is and whether the common good can vary from state to state, county to county, or country to country.
I would first define common good using utilitarianism, the philosophical concept promoted by Jeremy Bentham, the greatest amount of happiness for the greatest amount of people. And I think that our system of federalism, which not only allows for national governments, but also state governments and local governments, can vary in the greater good that they serve in themselves.
I believe that the common good can vary going from state to state. I think one of great examples to look at it, how now with this pandemic that we are facing, that 15 other states postponed their primary elections, and Wisconsin was one of the only states that did hold their primary election, which many people have been saying was going against the common good of the state, because lots of people did not have access to absentee ballots or did not get them in time, and many people had to wait in line, which was risking their health.
So during your 4-minute presentation and testimony, you referenced multiple protests. And so my question to you is, are the protesters against the governor's stay-at-home orders acting in appropriate or inappropriate civic engagement? Be specific.
I believe that these protesters are acting in inappropriate civic engagement because they are, by going out and into the public and being in groups, they are unintentionally involving people that aren't part of the protests by potentially spreading the virus, which will then affect people that weren't even out during the protests.
I like to disagree. I feel like that these people who are voting in against the governor's actions is due to their own self-interest and own common good, considering that they're worried about our future, considering our economy has been the lowest it's ever been since the Great Depression, which is something we need to take care of now before it gets even worse to have impactful life on us. Also, considering that here in Milwaukee, 60% of the cases are in the Milwaukee County, whereas there it's not as much as it is around up northern, western, or southern of Wisconsin. So considering that we have lockdowns for these small businesses in other counties and cities, and they're locked down with 1 or 2 patients with this pandemic, shows that there's like a big increase in why we should protest against it.
A solution to this is what some people have been doing is virtually protesting. There were counter protests that were virtual against the protests in Madison that took place on Friday. And these protests were for the stay-at-home order. And I think that these really showed the government how well the stay-at-home order, how we should keep it because it protects people and doesn't actually harm people like other protests at Madison would have been.
You spent some time talking about civic virtue, citing Aristotle, among other things. Do you believe that it's civically virtuous, or that we have a civic duty to be disobedient? And if so, when?
In his letter from a Birmingham jail, Martin Luther King Jr. argued that Americans have a moral duty to disobey unjust laws. And he defines an unjust law as a law that, that harms a human person rather than benefits it. So I think that people are justified and in a way obligated to protest against laws that are not for the common good.
So I think that's well said. So Birmingham, were students your age walking onto a park prepared to be harmed, possibly. So as you were just citing with your quote, what in your mind right now as students would take you to that point where you say, I'm willing to walk into that park to be disobedient and possibly harmed? Are there any issues today that would take you to that point?
I think that for today, there are some very important issues that there have been protests over, like the March for Our Lives is one of the bigger examples of them. But I feel like right now, because those students in Birmingham and during civil rights, they climbed over fences to get out of their schools to protest because it was their laws were infringing on their civil rights. But right now, I feel like there isn't any law that is infringing on my civil rights so hard that I'd be willing to get attacked by dogs or sprayed down with a fire hose and spend nights in jail over.
I agree. I agree that for me, there aren't any personal protests or issues that I would go to those circumstances for, but I think anything that directly impacts my future so greatly, like Nora was saying, and directly infringes on my civil rights, I would go and protest for, like the children did. They were quoted saying that this is our future and we want to help shape it. So I feel that anything that would fall under that category, I would as well be interested in protesting so greatly about.
So at any time, do you think violence could be justified to accomplish, and there you're saved. Nicely done.
Good.
So thank you for your very thoughtful presentation. You know, I really appreciate, we get a lot of historical examples, but I certainly appreciate going even far back from our founders to Aristotle and those individuals, because I think that informs kind of what we're doing today. I also appreciate your use of local examples. I thought that's particularly helpful on our end to get an understanding that you're applying these concepts and applying the material in a meaningful way. So thank you for your presentations. I certainly appreciate it.
You know, I did enjoy your presentation. One of the benefits of this program is hearing from students from all over the country, and we're lucky enough to be able to have teams from the East, the South, the Midwest, and it's always great to hear the differing views. I also wanted to compliment you on the fact that and actually there haven't been as many as I thought there would, but you made the comment that there can be civic engagement through a virtual protest that doesn't cause the potential harm that those protesters who are not wearing face masks and who are not practicing social distancing, you know, that they're having potential issues and harming potentially other people. And so, as I said, I'm surprised that not more of the students have talked about that there's different ways of civic engagement. And you did, in fact, bring that up, that there are different ways that a person can, quote unquote, protest or advocate what they believe. So that was a very good point. Thank you for your presentation. I enjoyed it.
I too enjoyed your presentation today. Nicely done. I enjoyed our conversation. I appreciate particularly talking about civic virtue. And is there a duty to be disobedient at certain times? And jumping to letters from a Birmingham jail is a very appropriate move in that direction. One of your quotes was, when he said, "What we do today will impact children who are yet unborn." And the fact is, you are the children who will lead our country forward to a time that I will never know because of my age. And there are unborn children that you will impact. And for that, I thank you for your participation today. And you did a wonderful job, and our future looks bright because you guys are all in it. For your parents who are hiding behind doors trying to listen in, or behind the computer on the other side, thank you very much for supporting your children through this process. And to the judge, listen to me, to the teacher, thank you for continuing this on in this project. They did a good job. Nicely done.
Thank you, Wisconsin.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everybody.
Thank you, judges.